I wanted to start today by and say hello, good morning, welcome. I wanted to pose a few ideas and talk about them if we can. And one of them is that I can't tell anyone what to think. I can tell you what to think, but you're going to think what you want to think in relation to what I think, right? I can't overcome an obsessive thought that you have with demanding you listen to my thought that may also be obsessive in some way. So obsessive thoughts naturally, since they are hell bent and they're basically the product of making believe thinking is reality, which is not true, and so not being true, they take constant maintenance to be maintained, because otherwise they have no substance. They have no life of their own. They have no principled basis that would be reliable. So they need to be constantly thought of. So my words can't tell you how to think, but if we share something that we know that isn't that can be debated but doesn't change with any debate we have, and can be questioned but doesn't become questionable because we question it, if we have that basis, that principled basis in our human experience, and we start considering that, the chances are the words we use may be different and distinct, but they may be enlightening to the capacity we each have to notice that knowingness in our own thinking. Because the words don't become a challenge, they sort of become sort of a poetic expression of this awareness that is similar and the same for each of us. I would say it's identical. And we don't have to think of it similarly to reference it or to point it out. So the conversation can be engaging rather than reactive and insistent that reality isn't real and truth isn't true and that's not my truth and I don't think that's reality and all that kind of other stuff that basically doesn't allow much for a conversation, but for an argument and sort of an attempt to reinforce positions. So if what is said has any actual value in reality, then it's the spirit of the words that contemplation reveals. If we're honest about our own experience and start looking at these words and thinking about these things, then our own knowing awareness will become a little more obvious or a lot more obvious to our thinking. It isn't because the knowing awareness isn't obvious, and it isn't because we don't know it. It's because we think we don't know it, and the preoccupation of thinking about thinking makes believe all that's happening is what we think. So anything else, including reality and truth, including the substance of a knowing awareness, seems to be somewhere else when we don't happen to be thinking about it. If that were the case, it would mean thinking is greater than reality and truth and actually is able to deny and suspend and obstruct and do all those things that seem to happen, but they're actually only reflections of thinking that is attempting to block anything else, to cripple any ability we have to make believe that what isn't true is true. So that basically is a lie. And it's impossible to have a lie turn into a truth, or it wouldn't be a lie. And the only thing a lie claims is that it's going to be truth. And that's the root of addiction. If I think a lie can and someday will be true, if I think about it harder, I'm now addicted to an idea that is impossible to ever realize and actualize, and think life's impossible, because to admit that I'm insane having that thought would have me stop, would be to have my perpetuation of it stop, because it would make no sense to continue. And since insanity isn't about making sense, the only way I can continue to act in insane ways is to think I'm sane doing it. So again, you can see the conflict between insanity being reliant on the idea that I'm sane, just like a lie relies on the idea that what is false could someday be true if I push it and push it and push it longer and harder. And that longer and harder is where the anxiety, the stress, the undermining, the depression, all those kinds of doubts of ourself, because when I think my thoughts are true, I think I become my thoughts. So we can all share in an identical source while having experiences that are expressed differently. which really defines the word conversation. The converse of what is being said is the interaction, the potential to grow and develop in this. And some of these thoughts can be very challenging because the basis of our sense of self and our sense of life has been tamped down for generations and millennia based on ideas that haven't been true and have become cultural ideas that aren't true. They're just developed beliefs, reliant on things that belief isn't necessary in something that's absolute. But if you believe in something that's true, the need for the belief disappears because the confirmation of the truth becomes obvious. Just like in mathematics, you don't have to believe that 2 + 2 is 4. Once you know 2 + 2 is 4, you just know it. You don't have to go back into believing about it. You don't have to rely on anything else other than to know it works, and it will be confirmed by expressing that. So obsessive thoughts only see and hear what is thought to be said and what is thought to be seen, which means if what is being said and seen isn't being seen, we're seeing an illusion and thinking it's reality. And that's a pretty good definition of insanity. So that's the first point I wanted to go over and make. And I think we've talked about it before, but I thought if I introduce some of these things again, it might be easier to focus our attention on it and talk about it. So since a lie only exists in thought, and it only lasts as long as we think of it or as truth or that it can be true. As soon as we think of it as a lie and not true, it's no longer a lie. So you can see the freedom there of just simply aligning what we think about things and the freedom we get from those things when we stop maintaining those things to be what they aren't effectively. We're trying to bring them into reality by turning an illusion into something with substance rather than just a thought. It's just imagine, which is what thinking is. So when I think my thoughts are real and true, I think I'm the creator of truth, and as a result, the maker of reality. And I think all I am is what I think. So I'm desperate to overcome any other contrary thought. This, going back to the first point, is that I can't tell you what to think. I can tell you what to think, but you're not going to think what I tell you. You're going to think what you think about what I tell you. So in this exploration or adventure, if we're doing this in that way, this contemplative adventure, this meditative awareness of awareness, if we're actually exposing ideas that have been untrue to this adventure of bringing light to them and starting to see the shadows disappear and the casts of doubt, the doubt that's been cast disappear that cause these seeming shadows and our haunting experience. If all those things are possible, then noticing the impossibility of trying to make something that isn't real is the beginning of that. It's just beginning to say, I'm never going to turn something that isn't true into truth. And the premise of that is that if truth is true, it's already true. It's always been true. It always will be true. And it really isn't in time or space to have been true or will be true, but it always is true in the present because it's not a time space-bound thing. It's something that's just actual in all respects, regardless of the dimensions that humans have broken things down to consider that we are in the third dimension because we see things three-dimensionally, or time and space is in the fourth dimension. Those dimensions are just things made up by humans to help define these quantifiable aspects of those dimensions. Doesn't mean that they're all separate out there and they have a meeting every once in a while to decide how they're interacting. They're all intimately interacting simultaneously right now for us to even have this conversation. So ego today is considered to be a false image. And it's interesting that the only thing false about the image is to think the image is reality. That's what's false about it. It's to think it's real. And to think about it as real is to think the ego attacks us, can attack us, has a mind of its own, does things on its own volition, which is an excuse for us to continue to be irresponsible for our subconscious thoughts. These things we don't see, we think act on us and don't notice that it's our maintenance of them that allows that to happen. It's the idea that we can keep things in the dark that we're doing and think by keeping them in the dark, they're not happening because we can't see them visually, for instance. And yet every kid knows whenever the lights come on and they're afraid of the ghost is never there. but it's never enough for them to turn the lights on, because as soon as they go off again, you can begin to imagine there must be something there worth being afraid of. And our conversation is starting to see that we're actually creating that, and the insanity of it is to pretend we have nothing to do with it. And if I have nothing to do with it, I also then lead that thought into, I can't do anything about it. And then I feel it's impossible and end up blaming life and all the people and the things, life is difficult, life is complicated, life is hard. So if it's a false image, it's an image. And again, it's an image considered to be real enough to be the opposite of truth within the context of a physical form. It can't even be the opposite of truth if it's delusional. It's just an imagined idea. That's it. There is no basis to it. So if we turn something like imagination, which is extraordinarily valuable as a resource, into a liability, we're actually turning our instincts against our own health and our own potential viability. And the thriving nature of our instinctual nature to survive starts to become seemingly scarce. But it's the thought that's scarce about reality and truth that we're witnessing, not reality or truth. There's no scarcity in something that's infinite or absolute. So what happens in this backward order, since addiction tries to reverse the natural order, is that health becomes disease, disease becomes natural, healing becomes a miracle and something that never seems to happen, and insanity becomes insanity. So the norm, we've normalized abnormality in culture, trying to make sense of something because we're doing something that makes no sense and not admitting it at the core, which is thinking our thoughts are reality, and that we can have our own reality and our own truth. Rather than see that we share it all, we just express it differently. Doesn't mean that this core issue of our sharing is different. So these ideas that all of these dark things are true and the light isn't true is sort of dispelled by the fact that whenever you turn light on something, darkness always disappears, always. So we're talking about looking at these things to the degree that we're willing to be enlightened and wake up to thoughts that would seem to be contrary to any lies we're maintaining or any obsessive thoughts we're maintaining as needing to be maintained for the sake of saving our life. We're looking at turning the light on that and seeing that the darkness never survives. It never prevails. So, little example of something that we talked about yesterday and became kind of clear to me in the last couple of weeks. To think it's impossible to be thinking what we don't think we are thinking equals, just to balance things, equals the equation to the same degree we will equal limit our expectations and demand that things that are possible to become impossible. So if I think on one side of the equation, I'm not thinking what I'm thinking, and I think that's possible for me to not be thinking what I'm thinking, on the experiential side, I'm going to make sure that things that are possible become impossible. So if I have the possibility to be productive, I'm going to derail that productivity to make sure that I am proven to be right by thinking the circumstances are proving the rightness of my scarce thought by creating scarcity in my own experience. And that's a pretty sick effort to spend a day making sure that everything I develop or can develop is blown up, simply to make the thought I'm having about reality and truth right, because I've manipulated circumstance to give me some confirmation outside of my head and think that I have nothing to do with that. So it's a clever orchestration to have the world and our experience or circumstances and consequences appear to make us right, only for the sake of being wrong. It's all coming out of this wrong that I'm maintaining in the basis of my thinking about my thinking being reality and truth, rather than seeing that it's just littered with ideas and beliefs and creeds and rules and regulations and cultural norms that aren't normal and they're not real. They're just thoughts. So that's number one. If, on the other hand, I begin to look at my expectations, because if what I'm doing that's wrong, I'm expecting the world to prove is right, I'm going to do the wrong thing over and over again. I'm going to be contrary to my own interest to have proof and evidence that I'm right by destroying things and undermining things and breaking up relationships and being unproductive and being dysfunctional and all that. I'm giving myself evidence in the manifestation of the world I'm seeing to say that I'm right. Now, it's insane to be right about wrong until I admit wrong as wrong, which then becomes right. I am in conflict with wrong, thinking my actions that are wrong are going to make it right. And in an absolute state of being, an absolute knowingness and omniscience, there is no conflict at all, not any. In the indivisibility of that, it isn't invisible, but we have a sense of awareness that tells us what's there, a sense of peace and a sense of calm. When we're aligned with that, our thinking calms down, rather than goes on this hyperactive, divisive, attacking, sort of manic mode that thinks somehow it can escape what doesn't even exist effectively. And that's the insanity of it. I'm constantly trying to outrun something that really is no more than a thought I have that's wrong about the thought I'm having. So if I have that tendency of doing that, something I've learned is that when I realized that expectations always mirrored the demands of my thinking, I was always let down by the expectations I had in other people, but I was really facing in them the aspect I wasn't willing to face in myself. So I was setting people up by saying, you do for me what I'm unwilling to do, and you will fulfill it in me. And this is basically codependence. You're going to do for me what I'm completely independent on doing for myself. And if you don't do it, I'm going to hate you. And I'm going to be angry with you. And you're going to be toxic in my mind. And I'm going to use that experience again to justify that what I'm doing is right. But if I begin to have expectations that nobody's going to do anything I want, but everyone is going to do what they want, and start to live with that, everybody's going to do what they want to do. And I would suggest to you, I would suggest that everybody's already doing what they want. If we are free to think what we want, we are always doing what we want. We can feel we've compromised ourselves because it's inconvenient to do what we want when we want something else, and think that by doing what we really want will upend or undermine someone else's agreement to go along with what it is we want. But that's what we want, if that's what we're choosing to do. Our choices are actually the sum total. I would call them prayers. We're praying for something we want in our expectations and in our choices. And if my expectation thinks my thoughts are real, then I think the only thing that should ever happen is the expectation I have of everyone else and everything else. So I'm constantly dashed and feel like I'm let down and all that kind of stuff, where I'm not, in fact, I'm simply feeling those things in relation to the thinking I've been doing about the demands I have that everything else obey this seeming reality, because reality would be real for everything. And I'm going to make sure and demand that everything behave that way. Otherwise, it really challenges the whole premise of what I'm doing, because the premise of what I'm doing is completely wrong. It's a lie in terms of my thinking. So if I expect people to do what they do, first of all, that takes a lot of pressure off of my expectation that they'll do anything else. And all of a sudden, I seem to have a relationship with them that's a little bit easier. But the second issue is to begin to expect that what happens will be what happens, rather than what I think should happen, what I think would happen, what I think could happen, what I wish would happen, what I hope will happen, and all that other kind of stuff that just is fancy and fantasy, trying to have things behave so that I don't have to admit the dysfunctional nature of my thinking, the demands I have on others. So those two things are a practice, sort of an exercise. If there's no fight in reality, then any conflict we're having is coming out of our thinking about reality that isn't true. Because if I think of reality as reality and begin to think that there's nothing to think about in it or of it, because it already is everything, I'm beginning to concede my thoughts are a product of that. They'll follow that lead. They'll take that lead and intuitively know what to do, which would have previously seemed impossible, and all of a sudden start to exceed those expectations immediately, because the possibility of that intuition starts to actually confirm that absolute knowing sense that we have, each of us. So we don't have to talk about it the same to be able to share the same basis. So the ideas that we have expectations for ourselves are also coming out of this whole construct of thought. If I think who I am is only what I think, then the expectation I have is that that's going to survive at all costs. And so most of what will happen will have me feel damned and depressed and not happy and conflicted and reactive and defensive and irritated and restless and discontent, all the things the book talks about. And it's all coming out of my commitment to the idea that my thinking is correct. I wouldn't have any internal conflict if my thinking was correct about what was actually happening rather than what I thought should be happening. And it might seem in this case that thinking has then nothing to do, because we've been so obsessed with thinking that thinking is about trying to overcome reality and overcome truth and demand that it's our own, rather than start to see that thinking actually knows exactly what to do when we stop asking it to do what it cannot do, what's impossible for it to do. Starts actually functioning on ways that don't take a lot of thought because it knows what to do. It's already part of nature. It's already informed. And it will perform according to that informed nature if we allow it and don't make believe that circumventing it and undermining it and subverting it and perverting it is our cause in life and our control. Think of self-control in this regard. If the self we're thinking about is thinking of itself, thinking about thinking itself, then what we're thinking about is our thinking. We're not thinking about ourselves. So to think we need self-control is to think the self is out of control. And that would be an accurate estimate or conclusion about a self that doesn't exist. It can't be in control whatsoever because there's nothing to be in control of. So we're taking it now to the extreme where it isn't anything other than a delusion, and a delusion is only a delusion to the person thinking that illusion is truth. It doesn't exist in the universe. It doesn't exist anywhere but in the confines of our brain and the thinking we're doing. So those are 3 points. Took a little longer than I thought it might, but that expectation issue has been huge for me in starting to notice that what happens, happens. And if I have any meaningful purpose, usefulness in it, if I'm at odds with it, I'm never going to express that useful purpose. I'm never going to be influential in a way that actually is beneficial and useful for everyone. I'm always going to be somehow or another trying to see there's something I need to get. And once I get that thing, then I can start acting on everyone else's behalf, but not until then, because this thing is too primary a problem for me to resolve, and I can't get beyond it. And I have to focus on it. I've got to be constantly focused on it to figure it out. Then I can do all those other things. When in fact, when I realize that that primary focus right now is a delusion, thinking about a delusion, it starts to make a lot less sense to continue, and the awareness starts to become more obvious because I've only pretended to be oblivious to it to support the contention that I was right about the wrong I was thinking.
So does this relate to what John had sent me? Just a little quote, because I was going to ask you about this. It seems like it's similar. It says, hair called real hair, then there are wigs. Teeth called real teeth, then there are false teeth. Official money, counterfeit money. It's the bane of psychic research. If there be psychic phenomena, there must be fraudulent psychic phenomena. So desperate is the situation here that Carrington argues that even if Palladino be caught cheating, that it's not to say that all her phenomena were fraudulent. My own version is that nothing indicates anything in a positive sense, because in a positive sense, there is nothing to be indicated. Here's what he highlighted. Everything that is called true must merge away indistinguishably into something called false. both are expressions of the same underlying quasiness and are continuous. Fraudulent antiquarian relics are very common, but they are not more common. They are fraudulent paintings. Does that make any sense?
Well, it's talking about stuff, I would say. JP is here, so he can address it better. But ultimately, Anthony, the question isn't so much about what everybody else is thinking, but how you and I can communicate around what's happening now in relation to a present sense that you may have, that you may want to admit having, that you may be better admitting having, that is absolutely at peace and isn't divided and isn't conflicted or feeling like inflicting itself on others is its goal. And human history, as JP's done a lot of research, is littered with all kinds of make-believe that has been considered reality that isn't reality at all. It never happened. It isn't happening. It's just ideas that are maintained that aren't true.
And the opposite, Jack.
About history.
And the opposite.
How do you
things
see that?
That have happened
Yes.
and did happen and continue to happen that are considered false.
Yes. So if the thinking I'm thinking about is my thinking is real, everything I'm going to see is going to appear backward because I'm backward in my thinking about my thinking. All I'm going to do is make conclusions about what I see and what I hear that have nothing to do with what I see and what I hear and everything to do with what I'm thinking. That means I'm not even seeing or hearing what's happening. So perhaps we've reached a point in human history where this conversation, and I would say the whole approach Bill Wilson developed for alcoholics who through history had been a hopeless group of people, that he developed an opportunity that's simple enough for people to actually have a complete 360-degree run where they start self-centeredly and end even looking at the possibility of acting principally in all their affairs. And principles are not a negotiable aspect of a fundamental primary foundation for existence. We can argue over them, we can debate them, but it doesn't have any impact on something that absolutely exists, whatever that principle is. Flight's a great example. Orville and Wilbur tried many, many, many different ways to get that wing to work. And to the degree that they were wrong in their choices and their conclusions, that plane crashed. But once it was right, it's the same wing they use today. And those guys did this back in the 1800s with very crude process of elimination effort. No computers. The aerodynamics hadn't even been developed. All people knew was that birds flew, things flew, and it was possible.
Yeah, that's my problem right there. You know, it's kind of like your Columbia-Sinian, well, I can't even say it, and I thought I coined it. But about Columbus, your Wilbur and Orville Wright thing is a problem for me. But what I think, Anthony, is what Jack is doing by herding you kind of around back is for you to focus on you and I had a question from your synopsis this morning, which might lead right into this, Jack. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, so what my question was is can you tell us the difference between want and need?
Well, they're probably the same, but one is presumed to be real and the other one is simply a choice, a preference. When I think, I mean, certainly we need air, there are certain fundamental things that we need. But when it comes to choices, when I think I need something, it's generally not that I need it. What I need is to confirm the want that I have to prove that I'm right. I want to demand on the world that it give me something to fulfill the lack of the vacuum that I've created in my own experience, and think that I have to have this thing. And that's what consumerism, I think, is a lot about. And that's largely what addiction is about. I have to have the drug. I have to have the drink. Think about that. We're having to have something. That's a redundancy. Having is about possession. It isn't about demanding. And yet when we turn the words around, they start forcing a thought that demands we do something. And it isn't true. We never had to drink. We chose to see it in a way that gave us the impression it was the only thing we could do. And what I learned in the first step was that when I thought I had control, when I could control and enjoy it, I spent years trying to prove that by over drinking, drinking out of control to prove I had control. So in as far as Orville and Wilbur go, John, I use them as examples. I'm not saying that they were the first ones to ever have anything to do with flight. I'm simply saying that what they do led to a wing that people use today that's reliable, and they did that a long time ago, and that same shape is effectively what aerodynamic, with all the computerization and all that, the same shape they developed is exactly what's used today, with some minor variations with the tips and different things.
Maybe we're flying around with a lot more sophisticated equipment, and maybe, I mean, you can see it in Egypt and in hieroglyphics and things of that nature, that there were, you know, all kinds of stuff flying around back then too.
Yeah.
I you know, I wasn't there, but I know what a pictogram is. I understand what a helicopter looks like now, and all of that. So that's what it's always my concern, you know, that we keep going back to you know, Wilbur and Columbus, when there's a plethora of planet that is yet to be explored. And that's why I think I sent you and him the same thing at the same time, him being Anthony, so that, you know, maybe we could discuss it. But I think the way you put the bit in his mouth and turned him around, I think that was pretty constructive, actually. And that I'm basically a distraction.
Well, you missed the sort of preamble this morning, and one of the points I made is that I can't tell anybody what to think. Everybody gets to choose what they want to think. So I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to propose that if we begin to contemplate what we know, if there's an absolute state of being and an absolute state of knowing awareness, if we contemplate that as something that's natural in our experience, then all the divisiveness over the circumstantial issues that will never, ever be aligned, because everybody's going to see them from their own thinking standpoint, start to become commonly discussed. Even if we're discussing them in different ways, the spirit of that principle becomes obvious. The spirit of that nature starts to become obvious. And it also dispels the need to think we need to go out and argue over points as to what happened. When you begin, one of the things I pointed out was that when I began to accept that what was happening, regardless of what I thought, and regardless of what I thought I wanted, and that maybe the way it was happening is exactly the way I wanted it, because it was giving me like a curriculum information about the thoughts I had that were wrong in relation to my experience, rather than have me become more insistent. Everyone began to bend their ways to my ways because I was so threatened by the idea that not everybody thought the way I did. We can have a knowing awareness that's absolutely the same and still talk about it differently while looking at the spirit of it, and it becomes more poetry and symmetry than an argument over history, which is not happening other than how we think about it right now. And if it's the sum total of everything that's happened, the fact is this present moment is in fact the sum total of everything that's actually happened, including all the toxic waste from the ideas that we thought weren't happening, that we thought were happening as a species. This moment is filled with that. It's absolutely the cumulative effect of all of those decisions and all of those actions. And so if they were back then, they are right now. And I would say it's a lot more pertinent to discuss what's happening presently than what may or may not have happened at some other time that we can spend a whole lifetime arguing and never settle the debate. If the present is the sum total of all that, the debate is over. It's present. It's here. The question is, what are we going to do about it productively as a species? And I'm not talking to one person if I'm not talking to all people, because we share a basic makeup in our DNA that doesn't need to be identical to be so close to identical that we obviously recognize each other as something within a context that we share something pretty dramatic with. And I wouldn't say dramatic in the most excessive way, but simply dynamic, maybe is a better word. We're all functioning very much on the same basis and acting as though our single thoughts are actually separating us, and they're not. They're just what we're choosing to think. So if that knowing sense is principled and we start noticing it and talking about it, we can talk about it in all the varied ways we're capable of talking about it, and it becomes an education of the variety out there rather than an assault and offensive, something to protect against and isolate from and find a new group that I need to hang out with that thinks more like I do because we have to kill the other people in all those other groups or get rid of them by pretending they don't exist. If there's something primary to our essence, then we share it right now, and it's an absolute state of being that cannot be disrupted by thought, because thought's a product of it. It is not the creator of it. As far as I can tell. Thoughts manifest effects. They don't create reality. They create effects within the context of reality. Humans have never made anything up that didn't exist that was transformed by what they did with it. And we talk about creating these things. We're not really creating them. We're just changing them. We're transmuting them or transforming them in some way.
So do you think that the old axiom of do you think that your life created your beliefs, or your beliefs created your life?
Thoughts are convictions, or beliefs are convictions of thought. And we wouldn't need to convict our thoughts if I believe in something that's true, I don't need to believe in it beyond my application of the thought, because the thought will be confirmed by a functional aspect that's well beyond my thinking. As much as my environment can be polluted with conflict and depression and thinking of things so wrong, that same environment could be filled with wonder and awe and functional capacity being expressed rather than dysfunctional capacity being depressed.
So your answer is neither.
Well, go over it with me again and let me clarify that.
Okay, so do you think that your life, not your life, I'm sorry, but do you think that Anthony's life created his beliefs, or did his beliefs create Anthony's life?
Well, if we think we are our thoughts, we think our thoughts define us, when in fact thoughts define thoughts. So we have to think who we are as what we think to think that our beliefs would define us or create us. And it's interesting. I mean, think of this. There was a point at which we didn't have any beliefs. There's a point at which we didn't have any thoughts. That would mean that we had no existence, and yet we came from the bounty of that life that somehow knew that the sperm and the ova were going to connect and create something. That wasn't created out of nothing. That was created out of a organic system that was designed to do just that thing. It was its purpose.
Influenced by something else.
Whatever the sum total.
Whatever is just a polite fuck you.
No. No. If I want to make believe I need to know every one of those details, I'm going to spend my life in a cocktail of trying to put the pieces together, when I guarantee you, John, right now, those pieces are seamlessly together in the potential we have to even have this discussion. There is no doubt in any of that stuff.
So because of my query, so which Anthony is it?
Well, I don't think you're asking whether Anthony's beliefs make him up. That would be to think that thinking is reality, and then his beliefs create Anthony.
And
Well, if Anthony is distinct in the world, then none of us have any life. Anthony's the ruler of the universe.
I'm liking this meeting a lot.
so, okay, now I'm going to pull it away from you, Lord Jack, and I'm going to give it to Anthony. So, Anthony, do you think your life created your beliefs, or your beliefs created your life?
Is it possible it could be both?
No, you can say, no, I think it's both. Yeah, and then I say, okay, that's the end of this query.
John,
But would you want my opinion?
Yeah.
His life created his beliefs.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, let's go. That's fun.
But that's not why I brought it up. The reason I brought it up is because I caught the tail end. I apologize for being late. I feel fortunate to actually got here though. But I did catch that the last probably 3 minutes of your deal, and I was excited by it, and that's why I asked the question that I asked before.
well, if there's anything infinite, it isn't Anthony's life that he has. It's the life we all share that we each express. And we are life forms. We are not life. We are forms of life, performing, informed, and performing on the basis of our thinking. It doesn't create our life. It simply creates and identify how we think about life. And if we're thinking incorrectly about life as an absolute source for existence, then we're going to be dysfunctional in all the various ways we try to put all the pieces together, because we're constantly trying to take them apart while we're putting them together. We're breaking the thing and thinking we're fixing the thing by breaking it further. That's addiction.
Yeah, and you know,
Endless cycle.
that's a really good point. Because the whole AA trip, which I have partaken on, obviously, or maybe not obviously to everybody, but to you.
Thank God.
It's obvious. Yeah, and so, but I don't have a belief in Billy Bob Biff or whatever his name is, who wrote a book. And I don't believe, again, that everything that he spouts is this magical thing. So I know that my beliefs created my life. Now, whether that's positive or negative, it doesn't matter, because these things will start wars, as you say so eloquently, and hatred and thisers and thaters and everything else. But I don't think it's the thoughts that create that, as you know. And I don't want to be redundant, but it's what you do with those thoughts.
John, would you have any beliefs if you had no thoughts?
Your thoughts are turned into belief. That's exactly what I'm talking about, and always have been.
I know. But if something is real and true, it does not need belief to be real or true.
And that's why I sent you and Anthony. I was going to say in unison, but I don't even know what text language it is. But at the same time, because there's a really nice sentence that he so eloquently wrote in there that Anthony read.
So we can debate circumstance forever.
Yeah. No, I am a distraction. I'm aware of that. And I heard that.
You're speaking to the point that you think you're made up by your beliefs. That means you think your thoughts are reality, and that would cause a natural conflict with reality if reality was so deficient as to need you to think about it.
Yeah.
To confirm it.
No. Yeah, but it's not true. What you're spouting is not true, because
within the context of your beliefs, nothing's going to be true that isn't in alignment with your beliefs.
Here, if I say, I really want that thing, but I don't get it, I'm fine. But if I say I really need that thing and I don't get it, then I'm unhappy.
Yes, because you really believe your thoughts are so true as to give you a need that is so necessary for your fulfillment that your fulfillment is completely deflated without it. It's not true. It's a concoction of thinking.
I'm not saying that beliefs are true. I'm saying that beliefs are Remember, I said it was either positive. Doesn't matter.
Generally speaking, beliefs are
Did I
faith
lose
in
you?
thoughts.
I'm sorry.
Generally speaking,
Can't believe
beliefs are faith
these are
in
thoughts that have gotten a little out of hand.
a little bit.
Whether they're good or bad, I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying that if I
Well,
want
make
something
the
and I don't get it,
judgment.
I'm cool.
Make the
I'm cool.
judgment. You're perfectly free to make the judgment. We're doing it all the
I
time.
don't want. I don't want to make the judgment. I rather.
Every assessment we come up with is a judgment. Brains are designed to judge, and we act like we shouldn't be judging. We couldn't be judging. We couldn't not be judging if we weren't judging that we weren't judging. It's impossible.
Yeah.
That's what brains do. We analyze. They analyze.
I understand. I understand.
Part of it.
If I was going to do that, I'd be praying for hair at this point, but I'm not going to do that because I don't believe it.
Well,
anyway,
I have just got a deeper breath. That may help. That's
no, I'm fine. I'm good.
Part of the direction. So
do I not?
A belief is an opinion or a conviction. You know why we feel guilty? Because we're guilty.
Well, what if we're not?
Well, we wouldn't feel guilt.
Well, bullshit.
Okay.
People feel guilt all the time for feeling guilty for something they didn't do. All the time. Happens all the time. Happens to me all the time.
You feel guilty for things you didn't do.
Basically, I feel guilty for doing something, and there's no guilt associated with it. It's just a belief.
Yeah, so you're pointing to the fact that beliefs are lies as easily as thoughts can be lies.
Not necessarily. It goes across the board.
Feeling guilty for things you're not guilty for.
I'm giving you the opposite end of the spectrum, yes. But there's people who believe, that the bush is on fire, or something else. It doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative. It's when thought changes to a belief, it's a little bit out of hand.
So in the absolute nature of existence, in the absolute concept of the infinite, there is no opposite that isn't the exact same thing. There is no division. There are no parts and pieces. There are no of these extremes that we think are opposite. Keep in mind, opposites in the relative universe, this universe that we think we're in, this physical realm, are connected by common ground. Every position we take in any direction creates the opposite position immediately. And to think that one position is possible without confirming all other positions is to cause the kind of fights that humans are famous for trying to win. Why? Because they're unwinnable. We keep fighting. We keep fighting. We keep fighting. We got new fights all the time. All the wars on drug. Coke couldn't be cheaper today after the war on drugs. 40 some years ago. I'm ashamed to have done it at the most expensive time with the worst quality. I should have waited for the war. It's cheaper today and better quality than it's ever been. We consistently lose because we're consistently fighting an unwinnable fight. So belief, probably the best definition I see here, is confidence in the truth or existence of something not immediately susceptible to rigorous proof. Meaning there's no evidence in the application of the belief. So we use belief to support the contention that it's true.
Would you like to hear my definition of belief?
I think we have been.
No, you haven't heard my definition. You're looking up a definition. I'm going to give you my definition.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
Belief is what is beloved of you. That's where the word comes from, by the way.
Yeah.
And you choose your beliefs.
Yes, of course. Like you choose your thoughts. So all of this conversation.
Except that they're thoughts on decadurabolin. They're different.
So think of beloved you is the idea that you are the love of the universe and you are separate from the universe, like you were asking Anthony about his life rather than life itself. If life is life, it isn't a divisible individual source. It's an indivisible absolute source. It's something we all share, something that's unifying, not something that's divisible. Oh, you can't hear? I'm not hearing you now, JP.
I
There you go.
There
I
you
didn't
go.
get anything there, but
Yeah,
I
convenient.
have to go. I also have to go to work, but I
Very
really, I
convenient
appreciate,
timing.
I have for you.
Hey, one thing I wanted to
Trust me,
say.
trust me,
One
for you, it's convenient.
one thing.
But I have to go to work, and I really appreciate everybody's patience with me today. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hey, one thing I wanted to say is I was playing a song by Stevie Wonder and I was singing the words. It's one of my favorite songs. And then all of a sudden, years, I've never really understood what the words meant. And it said, you believe in things that you don't understand. Superstition is the word. So that's really all he's talking about is believing in things that you don't understand. And then I guess they would just call that a superstition.
Yeah.
That that was interesting.
Well, and
I
think
mean,
of superstitions often as leading to mythology and
yeah.
all kinds of fantasy, fairy tales, and also haunting images.
Yeah. I love that line always, and I never really put the two together. I just thought they were just kind of neat word. I didn't realize that's really what he was talking about, as silly, as easy as it is to understand. You believe in things you don't understand. Superstition is the word or the way.
Anthony, what was the name of that album? Because the name of the album is pretty telling too.
Yeah, something about the door, an open door, or what is it?
Keys in the Name of Life or something?
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
So this poetry has been discussed through human history.
Yeah.
It's just been, people often say, oh, I don't get poetry. I don't understand poetry. Yeah, well, because if they were to admit it, it would dispel a lot of the mythology that they perpetuate as the source of who they are. And it would be true for me too, in that same regard. To any degree, I'm maintaining these thoughts as though they're true. I'm going to pretend I can't hear things that would counter or bring light to those thoughts. And to begin to admit that I do that begins to actually make me somewhat susceptible to that listening, because it makes no sense to defend against something that's true, because it's indefensible to continue to defend against something that's not. It just starts to bring sort of a balance to it where it dissipates. So this is looking at the essence of thinking as being the addictive, primary addictive source of all the compulsions. And I don't know anyone who's gotten sober, especially for a long period of time, that doesn't find other compulsions in their experience. And I'm not suggesting eliminate them, don't do them. I'm saying do them. Start noticing them. Start being honest enough to have them. And it will be easier to begin to see that it isn't something that need be done, but something that's being chosen. And that's the responsible approach to responsibility. If there's a responsible source for existence, we are responsible by nature, not by choice. So the only thing we choose is irresponsibility. The only thing we choose is dysfunction when we're not aligned with that, or think we're not aligned with that, or think we cannot be aligned with that because we're fighting to identify ourselves as an individual based on the beliefs and the thinking and all of the things that are actually eroding our physical capacity because they undermine our physical health. Stress undermines every aspect of our physicality, and every disease can be rocketed into a killing machine if we undermine our body's capacity to function. The metabolism and the parasympathetic system and our nervous system and our immune system, all of those things are undermined, and their whole basis is to maintain stability, to maintain homeostasis, to create balance so that we're constantly able to withstand all the various things that come along, the bacteria and the viruses and all the things that happen. The body's designed to heal. And we've taken for granted disease is natural and disease and healing is a miracle. It's not a miracle. Healing is actually natural, and disease is very unnatural. Especially when we've been at the source of undermining the body's ability to actually withstand the thing it's designed to do. We've been proactive, sickly proactive in making believe it's the only thing we can do because we claim not to have anything to do with it. And anytime I want to deny what I'm doing, I all of a sudden feel helpless and hopeless about resolving it. Of course I do. It gives more credence to the fact that it's happening to me rather than being caused by me. It's just a lie looking for excuses. And there's no excuse in truth. By the way.
I wish I knew what Arliss was thinking right now. He's very quiet and taking it all in.
Well, I know whatever it is, it's poetic, typically.
Yeah. What's your input on this, Arliss?
Um, I just sort of dropped in as I do. I like the sensation of dropping in, catching it as it sort of off the ground. But I'm always interested in the terms that we pose the argument in, like that fellow John, I think it was in the truck.
Mhm.
He's talking about belief and want and need. And the terms themselves are an attempt to describe something that means to be different. They all mean to be different. But in my experience, what I'm always dealing with when I wake up in the morning is the irrefutable. I'm trying to think if it has ever been any different, and I can't remember a time, even when I was incapacitated, where my first thought was not organized around some idea of memory as who I was. I wake up, I think, oh, this is my wife, or this is not my wife. Now I've got a situation. I wake up, I think, I need to get something in here. I need to cop. I need to do this. I need that. I've got a job. I've got to go to the, and I start organizing a sense of a self around these thoughts, which are all memories. And as I've gone through the thing that's been necessary for me to go through to get better over the years, I've discovered these brief flashes of just the wisp of an idea that identifying myself in any way whatsoever is sort of fruitless, and it's editorial. It's like, oh, now I'm a worker. Now I'm a father. Now I'm a wife, husband. I'm a, whatever appellation I choose to name myself with. And it's all based on people, circumstance, memory, projection of the future. If I don't do this, I'll lose my job. If I don't do this, all these kinds of things, all organized around a sense of myself, of a self that's separate. And all the reading that I've done and all my experience has led me to believe just a little bit that the whole notion of a self is a construct. We make it up. We get a name. We get told who we are by the people that are raising us, that we're dependent upon. As soon as we get language, they give us language, and it's the same language they have often. Rarely is it more than one language. Sometimes in some houses, it's many, many different languages. You have a better option of having that happen if you live in Europe. But most of the time, you're sort of dependent on, at the time that you're just purely sensory input with no judgment whatsoever, you're just taking it in as a child. And you're told who you are by your family, by the church, by that you're involved in. I grew up, for example, in an evangelical household. This is who we are, which implies, like every club, there is the first property of a club is to decide who doesn't get in. And those people are thought of this way, and all this, and it's coming in, and it's coming in, and it's coming in. And some of you bite down on it, some of it's confusing and all that. But it all gets around to the thing that Jack's talking about all the time, and that is in the basis of pretty much every spiritual practice I've ever run into, and a lot of great, what we would call scientific thought, going all the way back to Sophocles and Socrates and on up to Newton, and then Einstein, and Walter Benjamin, and then all the philosophers in this, is the idea that we need to get in the present moment. And the difficulty of living in the present moment is exacerbated by the fact that we are not like cows, and I have them and I've observed them, and they tend to not show any evidence that they live in the past or the future. But we as a species spend most of our time referencing the past to make educated guesses about the future. We are rarely in the present moment. If it was a default setting for us, all these spiritual disciplines wouldn't keep harping on it. All these monks and priests wouldn't be talking about the present moment all the time. So I've got to watch the way I'm made and the way I've taken in information, because I guess what I would say, Anthony, in the long version, the Cliff Notes version would be, I believe that the self is constructed out of the past, referencing the past. It's partly our genetics. It is partly the whim of where we are born and who we are born to and where we grow up. It is then based on every single decision and conclusion we make. From that point that we begin to make decisions and conclusions. So when I think I have free will, I'm not so sure about that as being evidenced by the species. We're always making decisions based on the last one we made. So if we're making a decision based on a boat wreck that we're in, that decision is based on the fact that we decided to take a boat trip and then decided to do it in a hurry and not check out as to whether or not there was a leak in the boat. And so we find ourselves in a sinking boat and we go, who's the fucker that did this? You know, who's it? We're looking to blame somebody, and on and on and on and on. So I'm just saying, you know, in response to what I've heard so far, that the notion of thinking has to be separated from thought. I have no control over a thought that comes in my head, nor do I have control over a feeling I might have. But I do have some ability to avoid constructing stories and judgments based on thoughts and feelings. Thinking is different than having a thought. There's nothing wrong with thinking if you're trying to miter a joint. You go, okay, what's the angle? Let me measure it. Let me put it together. And then, you know, but that's different than being unable to measure twice and cut once and have it work out, and then destroying the workshop because of the judgment, which is, this is fucked.
I have an aunt, thanks, Charles. I have an aunt that believes we have no real free choice, that you're born, you don't decide if you're a man or a woman, you don't decide where you're going to be born, who your parents are, what color hair you have, what color you have, really no choices. And because of where you're born, then things open up. Maybe if you're born wealthy, you have opportunities that other people wouldn't have. The only thing you really choose is what kind of toothpaste you're going to have, or something very minor. That's her philosophy.
Well, that would suggest that what Arliss's point you're talking about, Arliss, is that there are thinking has very good purpose when it is utilized properly compared to the dysfunctional results we face when it isn't.
Yes.
And the one is aligned with what's actually happening, and the other one is aligned with only what is being thought to be happening, meaning the thought thinking of itself has become so engrossed with itself and so narcissistic with its image and its projection of that appearance that it's not paying attention to what's happening, and we wonder why we keep running into things and then need to burn them down to prove it was the thing that needed to be burned down, rather than the thought had no basis to begin with that we were operating on, and seeing that we manifest those things to finally give ourselves some perceptual perspective, you know. And it's, my sense is we're so beautifully designed and we've been simply not very beautiful in expressing it.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I would say that what we think of as thinking often is just one thought that is ridden straight to hell.
Right.
You know, like you wake up and you go, I've had this happen so many, I wake up and I go, oh, I need money. And then I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll think it again. I need money. And so I think, oh, it must be true. I've
Yeah.
thought twice. And then I'll call my accountant and he goes, what, are you going to buy something like a house or, what do you need it for? And I'll go, no, I've just thought that I needed some money. I mean, it just occurred to me this morning when I woke up that I need some money. And he goes, oh, this is one of those phone calls. Like,
Isn't it
there's
funny that the
interrogation
accountant
of the
would be
thought.
accountable?
I think it's why we pray and meditate, is to stop for a moment and say, hang on, before we get going with this very sophisticated apparatus up here, let's ask A for a little bit of help. Let's take a break so that we can kind of sort ourselves out from this thing we brought to the mat before we get out in the world and start doing ourselves or anybody else any damage just because of the activity that's going on up in here.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong with a healthy skepticism. Any thought that I have needs to be hauled into court and interrogated. Like, hang on a second. And I think every time I get the email that says we're going to meet, and I read through what's been written, it's always to do with, for me anyway, what's useful about it is the recognition, just the recognition, to start with the recognition that my thoughts and my feelings are not looking out for me. They're thoughts and feelings, and they are a phenomenon, but they are not something that is by definition actionable. Let's have them, fine. I can't help it, fine. But let me not deploy myself based on those things.
Well, and my sense is, Arliss, that historically this has been a problem. The reason that the gurus and all these people keep seeking is because we've been looking for something that doesn't exist, and we've been ignoring the actuality of what is happening. And it is that idea that my sense is, and this is, again, a consideration, something to contemplate, something to sit with, not something to argue over. But my sense is we can't be anywhere but the present, because the only place anything ever happens is in the present. And we are simply thinking we're not in the present by thinking is reality and can actually void the present. And that's the same insanity that leads people to make believe that conquering other people and killing them is justified by the thinking they're doing.
Yeah, my wife will often say to me, honey, where are you? And I'm dreamy. I'm just naturally dreamy. It's my work. My work is involved in that. So, I don't have a problem with, but my kids as well, all three of my boys have bitten me in essentially the same place on the inside of my leg when they were as high as their head was just above my knee to get my attention, literally. If you want to call that genetics or just circumstances, they have all bitten me there to get my attention. Daddy, 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 I'm somewhere else, right? Literally somewhere else. My mind is so preoccupied with the reality that I've constructed.
So the difference,
abandon ship.
The difference in the addiction to the thinking and the thinking is the neutrality of recognizing that we're choosing to continue to entertain that chronically and obsessively with the idea that somehow it's going to someday pan out. The investment we're making in that attention is going to someday pay interest. And what happens is we lose interest in things that are actually happening while we're paying attention to things that are not. So my sense is we have mistaken the idea that our attention removes us from the presence, when what it does is removes our thinking from thinking about anything that's actually happening. So what happens is we don't think anybody's doing anything and anybody is even there because we're so engrossed with the idea that we can imagine. And actually, imagination, as you know in your business and life, is a fascinating capacity that we have, that once we make believe our imagination is reality, it starts to become a major liability in our ability to function and actually create things that are useful and purposeful and meaningful. And what Bill Wilson pointed out, and I believe was one of the hallmarks not only of the traditions, but the program, is anonymity. anonymity is often thought of as a way to avoid having the stigma of alcoholism or drug addiction follow us around in public, so that people don't see us as that. Again, those names that we have and those identification markers that we think are us. When we are allowed that anonymity, it gives us a chance to face something that's a little bit different. But what's interesting about anonymity in its spiritual sense is that it is a faceless, personaless, entity-less essence that we're sharing, which is what the traditions are about. It's characterless, so it's defectiveless. And the defects of characters are the idea that these characterizations that I define myself of are in fact true. So I keep fighting to reinforce them as though they actually identify me, when in fact they just identify what I'm thinking and what I'm thinking about my thinking. And when I think I need to get them right, they're always changing, so they can never be right in that final way that the absolute rightness of an absolute state of being knows. That rightness is already in place and it can't be moved, it can't be shaken. But we can shake it and be stirred. We can shake it and be stirred by the shaking we do in our thinking, and as a result, our physicality, our feelings. My sense is thinking happens in a brain. Brains are always analyzing stuff. It's actually a better computer than any on earth so far, in terms of its capacity to take in information and digest it in a way to help serve the physicality of our body and help it survive. Massive capacity. But as Einstein talked about, and some other physicists, he thought we were using about 5 to 7% of our capacity. Well, if my attention is always being paid to a reality that doesn't exist, that would certainly diminish my capacity to begin to utilize a functional capacity that would be natural to my human existence. And it's largely what the steps are designed to do, is take our hands off of the ideas that we've been maintaining and start to turn in a direction where we can begin to realize that we can make very functional choices if we begin to notice that the basis of our existence is irrefutable, undeniable, absolute in every respect, and is in fact truth and reality. Not something I have to create, not something I have to remember, not something I have to meditate to get to, but something I always know, which is why when I meditate, I'm always confirmed that there's always something there greater than the thinking I'm doing. And my sense is prayers are really asking me to start to think beyond the horizon of the limited thinking that I think defines me. If I go just beyond the horizon, I begin to realize that everything that's always been there has always been there. And everyone on that planet that I couldn't see the other half of, because I can't see two halves of a ball simultaneously. It's impossible. We can't look at the backside of a sphere ever while we're looking at one side of it. It does not mean that it doesn't exist. Yet in thinking, we think that if we don't think it's there, it isn't there. And it again gives credit to this mission that we go out on to prove that the wrong thinking we're doing is right. And I would say that major addiction is what Buddha talked about in terms of attachment and desire. He didn't say life was suffering. He said attachment in life was suffering. And that attachment to desire, as he pointed out, was the idea that I had to have something. I got to have that thing. I've got to do that thing, that I am nothing without that thing. Why would I think I'm nothing without that thing if the basis of my existence is everything? But to think of myself, as Arliss was pointing out, is something separate and distinct from that everything, because I can think of myself when really all I'm doing is thinking of thinking itself. And I've misidentified myself as being the thinking of itself. We're always present thinking we're not. That's perfectly something we're free to do. It sort of proves that there is a freedom in the will if we can continue. My sense is will are the choices we make. And every choice we make has a want attached to it that we want to realize. And if the want we have is sick, what we're going to realize are sick consequences that we're going to claim to have nothing to do with. So we're going to say we don't want anything to do with them. They shouldn't be happening. I wish they weren't happening. My life is plagued with these things all the time, but they're literally being created by my own projection of ideas that aren't true. They have no basis. So if something has no basis, I really have nothing to fight except the idea that there's a basis in that thing. And that's what obsessive thinking is. Constantly thinking about the thing that's wrong is going to make it right someday, somehow. And it isn't even the idea that it will be right. It's the idea that it can be right that eggs me on and gives me some hope and all that kind of stuff. I don't need hope in something that's absolute because it is hopeless in regard to my hope.
And this goes along with what you always say, that you get what you want. Like everybody is wanting what they have. It's your choice.
Well, the difference is if I say I don't want it, I won't learn from it. If I begin to say that I actually want things exactly the way they are, then it becomes a curriculum. Like I've gone to school and I've gone to a university and they have created a curriculum perfectly designed for what I'm doing that I'm not doing right. Like school is basically training us, hoping to train us in principles about life and philosophy and things that have been thought, not to tell us what to think, but to allow us to begin to think constructively, critically, not in terms of contempt necessarily, but in terms of looking honestly enough to see that our own thinking is largely wrong, or we would all be doing everything right. And we would look out there and see the abundance being created and would be awash in gratefulness because we'd be witnessing the fullness of greatness that we've already had, always had, and simply don't express all the time. If I need to come up with a grateful list all the time, it's because I'm not very grateful by what I see. And I would say it's disturbing to see things that we're doing that are disturbed. And to miss that is to pretend that somehow ignoring it is better. And ignorance is the beginning of the idea that if I go numb to something, I'm better off. But as sentient beings, going numb is killing ourselves in terms of our awakened state, which is, I suspect, the dream you were talking about, Arliss. To be in a dream and think it's true is to be haunted by the dream. Anyone who wakes up from a dream that's a nightmare realizes immediately it was a dream. The nightmare's gone, the fear's gone. If I live during my day thinking I'm awake the whole time and not noticing that I put myself to sleep like a vet in many ways to pretend I can ignore things and pretend my ignorance is in fact denying those things, and I become numb to those things, I'm actually undermining my sentient capacity to be aware. Sensitivity is a form of awareness, and all of a sudden start dysfunctioning in ways to try to prove the wrong is right. It's crazy. It's literally insanity, and I can't maintain insanity if I don't think it's sane. As soon as I say insanity is insane, I'm no longer insane. As soon as I admit wrong as wrong, I'm right. I start having a relationship to it that allows me the neutrality that Bill talks about.
Surrender to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the first step. The first step wasn't talking about alcohol, drugs, any of those things as being the problem. It was talking about them as being the symptom. And the problem was, I got this. I can control this. I can manipulate this. I can figure this out. If I push harder, it will get better. And what happened? It always got worse, but conveniently, I pretended the worst wasn't happening, that it was everybody else's fault, that it was the world. The world becomes damning. And what do? Spend more and more time alone so that there's no potential contest to that thinking. And all I'm doing is left thinking about my thinking while I'm drugging and drugging and drugging. I'm dosing and dosing and dosing until I overdose. Trying to put myself out of the misery I'm consistently committed to creating. It's insanity. And that self, Arliss, that you're describing is exactly, if ego is defined as a false image, which it typically is considered, then again, we're seeing that the falseness of it is thinking the image is true, rather than simply an image. It's an illusion of thought. It's a narrative that we create in our own capacity to it. My experience is that everything I think is attached to some sort of movie going on in my head about it, faces of people and places and things that are developed in that story that I tell. It isn't just a word. It's all attached to a visual thing that I create to say, well, it's got to be real because it looks a lot like reality. And it's kind of like going to the movie where everybody dies and thinking all the actors are dead. Nobody leaves the theater and says, oh, God, I loved him as an actor. It's too bad he'll never be able to do it again.
I think of this thing about the ego, or as just the thing that wants. I just think of that part of me that wants, that the minute it wants, it separates into what I think of as a self, just the wanting. the wanting. And the wanter is never satisfied with what it has because then it has it. And that's different than wanting. Wanting in that construct to me is the thing that separates, and it's the thing that's inexhaustible. It never is satisfied. It never is satisfied. I just think of it as that particular thing that, announces itself. And I just want to say before I have to get off, because I've got somebody waving at me over here, but I'm supposed to leave and I'm not dressed. I'm always not dressed when I'm supposed to leave. The thing is that what I take about this is it's sort of like, to me, what getting out of this loop of thinking that it's reality is kind of like operating in a way when I found out that I was showing up to build something and I had a blowtorch and I couldn't understand why it wasn't working, when really life is about creation and not, burning it down all the time like I was doing. And what meditation and prayer gave me were the ability to kind of just get a little glimpse of those things and get a little bit better at seeing what is on offer all the time. Life is on offer. It's not aimed at me. It's not attacking me. It's on offer. It's right there. It's right there all the time. It's on offer. And I never saw it that way. And I'm very grateful for all of these ways of talking about it and seeing it. And, and I'm lucky right now that my presence is actually required and longed for, rather than people running for the hills going, "Oh God, here he comes." So I'll see you guys in a while. Thanks for asking me.
Thanks, Arliss.
Yeah, thanks.
He's a great listener.
Well, he's very conscientious. Always has been. I've known him for almost as long, if not as long, as I've been sober. And being able to look at thoughts and begin to consider things is a very different discussion than fighting over them and arguing over them and trying to defend them. Because it's an opening. It's an opening to something greater than the limitations of a thought. A thought that's limited, the more and more I hammer on it, gets smaller and smaller. I'm trying to make a point, and eventually something that continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller can't get any smaller. And that pressure explodes. Basically sort of a reflection of the Big Bang, which we imagine was the start of this universe. I don't know. I mean, whatever happened, happened. I'm not going to speak to it in words that are ever going to do it the kind of justice that it did to have us here now. But I can speak to the moment as being a wonderful potential capacity to reflect that thing, that whatever it was that happened, to reflect it and start to realize we're actually very much a part of it, never apart from it, intimately woven into it without even having to be woven. There's nothing, we're talking about a realm that even in the dimensions that humans have created to define the specific, the first and second, third dimension and all that stuff, we're barely, I think they've got 10 to 13 of them described right now. It becomes almost inconceivable to consider those dimensions within the mentality that we've been so commonly using. It seems to make no sense whatsoever, yet it doesn't matter whether it makes sense because it's actually the reality that we're in now. It is what is providing the potential in its totality, not just in the third dimension or the fourth dimension or the fifth dimension, any of that. It's the totality of all them right now that we're actually witnessing. And that's a pretty awe-inspired thought, because it's inspiration is spirit. It's beginning to see that this nature is our nature. It is not some negotiable option. It isn't a choice. And the difference between addiction, when it isn't a choice, it condemns us to death. At some point, in some way, we're killing off our capacity to express information and inspiration by acting on desperation. And if we're trying constantly to get away from that desperation, we're maintaining the conditions that create that desperation while thinking we need to constantly get over it and feel better about it, do things to feel better. I am not against prayer or meditation. I'm simply suggesting that when I'm using prayer and meditation, or I'm using any ritual to try to feel better, I am ignoring the thing that I'm doing that isn't better. I'm ignoring what's worse. And to be ignorant of it is to act as though it's not there. And if it's there doing what it's doing, it's going to continue to do what it's doing. And I end up maintaining it by denying it. And what am I maintaining? An idea that isn't true, as true, creating a sense of fear, a sense of anxiety, a sense of mistrust, a sense of doubt, a sense, as Arliss was talking about, needing something to fill it, but there's nothing there that can be filled because it actually does not exist except in the thinking. And to be insane enough to make believe that my life is impacted by something that keeps happening to me shows how quickly I am to try to be irresponsible for the responsibility of maintaining and insisting on that thought right now, making believe that now I'm condemned to it by continuing to do it and not notice that I'm choosing to feel condemned by continuing to insist on repeating the same old thinking. So when it comes to free will, Anthony, ask yourself, when you make a decision, and then decide not to make that decision, if there isn't some freedom and flexibility in it, when you don't feel absolutely condemned to do the thing. And that condemnation comes out of addiction. In an absolute sense, the effect of love, for instance, if love is the bounty of an absolute source and we don't choose it, we can't be condemned by it because you can't be condemned by having been given everything. Condemnation generally infers some restriction on movement or having. And in the real sense, there's absolutely no restriction whatsoever. And to think of it as God limiting us, God forcing us to behave, and God not giving us something is to think of God more like a human. And my experience is that I thought God was ego. Ego became my God because I thought I was the creator of reality. I thought that all I was what I thought. And all of a sudden I started thinking of God as a very punitive, spiteful entity. Not loving, not giving, not always asking for more, because I was constantly promoting less. That's insanity. But why not? If I'm going to blame something, why not blame the biggest concept in the universe to try to excuse myself? And I would say humans have done that very successfully for a long time. And it isn't necessary. But if it's an addiction, we think it isn't we don't have any other choice. And if we think we don't have any other choice and it's an addiction, we absolutely have another choice. Why would we use the word choice and the idea that we have no choice when choice always allows not to be chosen as a principle? Always. So it's our own insistence in the present that we keep doing. And there's nothing I'm doing, like we talked about earlier. If I think a part of what I'm doing, I'm not doing. To the degree that I deny that there's a possibility that I may be doing the things I don't think I'm doing that are causing the effects I claim not to want, I'm going to look out into the world, just as Arliss said, he wakes up and has that sense of doom or that sense of I've got to do this. All of that is going to be recreated on the other side by limiting the possibility of my actual functional capacity to prove that the world is actually now evidence that my thinking in the most paltry, scarce way is true. All I am is what I think. Can't be true. I can think that, but I can also think that unicorns are going to come to my rescue when I'm drowning. I've never seen it happen. I'm not sure it can, possibly. I'm not going to, I don't want to admit the impossibility of anything, and I don't want to admit the possibility of everything if it's based on something that simply seems to be possible when in fact it isn't possible. What I know is possible is what happens. And what's possible is we can make a mess out of things because that happens. It's possible to do that. It doesn't mean that there's great possibility in that, because the abundance of that is very restricted to the people that are immediately affected by it. And I would say ultimately everybody's affected by it anyhow. But that other bounty actually helps people learn that there's something about them that goes well beyond their thinking, and they can begin functioning at a level that is so easy and so simple and so able that the bounty of it is, people want to give everything away because they know they've got everything. And the whole concept in the paradoxes in AA is we give it away to keep it. That would mean that if we give everything away, we get to have everything. That's a very different dynamic to think about, a point of view to think from, rather than if I give everything away, I have nothing. Because there are no opposites in that absolute realm, if I give it all away, I begin to witness that I have it all. Herb Kagan says the ego, which would be my thinking about my thinking, wants proof before it acts. So I'm constantly muttering in my mind and my thoughts, my brain, not even my mind, but I'm muttering in my thoughts. How am I going to get this thing to work before I take the action? Because I'm so afraid of taking the wrong action. I don't ever want to be seen as wrong because I'm thinking wrong. It would expose me. So self-consciousness is undue regard for appearance. How do I look to everybody? How does everybody think I am? Everybody else's thinking becomes really interesting to me when my thinking is wrong. I want to make sure everybody's thinking about me in the best way, so I'm constantly promoting images to make believe that somehow I'm better by promoting more illusions, more images, appearance. If the absolute nature is absolute, I've been given everything, I have everything, and it isn't just me, it's us. And to start to see that we're all inclusive in this. Whatever I do wrong with everything and everyone. Whatever I do right becomes a complement to the potential of anyone else doing right. Most people, once they see how to ride a bike, don't need to go through the process of thinking they don't know how to ride a bike. They just get on it and ride. And yet the trepidation of it is huge when people haven't done it. So the application of something right, you don't have to think about it anymore. You just know to do it. And that means everybody can do it too. But mostly people, if you don't have any legs, it might be a problem to ride a bike, but there's probably ways to deal with that. So there can always be slight exceptions to the absolute state of function. And yet in addiction, all of the evidence seems to mean nothing. All of the failure, all of the seeking through history seems to be something we need to keep doing. But if we're seeking something that hasn't apparently been found, it may be we're looking for something we already have rather than something that isn't where we are. So again, if we're seeking, we're always looking into the future. We're always looking at some other time. What about where we are? And I would suggest, just to sort of blow the lid off of being in the present time, is that the present isn't in time because it's always new. It's always new. It means every moment you have the possibility to do whatever you want. And there again is freedom. Doesn't mean you're not going to restrict that freedom by thinking addictively about what you have to do and should do and would do and can't do and might do and want. All that stuff is possible. But if the freedom is free, it means we get to choose whatever we want, which means we do choose what we want, and we want what we choose, and we want the circumstances that come because they're giving us perspective on what we're doing wrong. Within our thinking now, not within our reality, not within the essence of our knowing. It is the essence of our knowing that helps us recognize something is wrong, because the contrast between the absolute nature of peace and the nature of a disturbance and conflict and struggle and strife and anxiety and stress is very distinctly unique to humans maligned with reality in their thinking. They're not actually maligned, it's just the thinking we're doing that actually gives us that impression. The effects we create by thinking are what we manifest. And to use them as an excuse that there's nothing we can do is to pretend we have nothing to do with the creation of them. If we create anything, it's the mess. If everything's already been created, we already have it. There's nothing to fulfill, there's nothing to do. we are free. And there's a very big difference in choosing things to do when you know you have everything than when you think you have to get at something to not get at, but get something to prove who you are is right and real and actually amounts to something. We're never going to get enough to fill a void that can't be filled because there's nothing. It's like adding to the numerator when the denominator is zero. It's always going to be zero. And that's the difference between something that is real that we want to change and transform and work with, and something that is delusional that we have changing to give us the impression it's real. We keep changing it, thinking it'll get better. It's never going to get better because it's worse. We can think we're getting better, and that's how you maintain the sickness. That's exactly what we're doing in the present, choosing to make believe if we re-choose this hopeless thought that someday it will become hopeful. And what's beautiful about a trustworthy reality that's absolute in every way is that if we rely on it at all with faith or belief or hope, it immediately is confirmed in the assurance that we get in our experience and the fulfillment and the sense of completion. Because anything we do, that intuitive sense will have us do things we couldn't have ever thought of. Because thinking about thinking is it's a drowning pool of stagnation. Yes, we can come up with some things better than other things, but for the most part, they don't last. They're not permanent. We have to constantly connive to come up with the next big scheme to give us the impression we're better off. Really isn't.
What's interesting is my neighbor told me, he goes, you have a hard time making decisions, I noticed. And I didn't like hearing that. And then he goes, and when you do, you're very impulsive. And I really got offended, but even though it's true, it was interesting to look at that.
Yeah. Well, and you don't have a hard time making decisions. You just have a hard time making decisions you're willing to accept responsibility for, which is exactly the nature of addiction. It's if responsibility is the nature of existence, then we're already responsible. We're always responsible, and we know it. That means irresponsibility is a choice. Here's where the freedom is, Anthony. If we can choose to do things that are so contrary to life, that literally depress our immune system, undermine our nervous system's capacity to function, have our bodies develop all kinds of drugs for an alleged emergency that isn't even happening, that become corrosive to our bodily system. We're literally killing ourselves in the name of proving that we're alive. Think of how contrary that is to any good sense. So making decisions, if I'm constantly trying to overcome what's wrong, I'm scared to death that I'm going to make a decision that's wrong because I'm going to out myself to everybody. Everybody's going to say, oh, you're wrong. The one thing a liar generally doesn't want to hear is that they're a liar.
Right.
And I would say to any degree I maintain a thought of any sort and think it's right, that's wrong, I'm a liar. I don't have to be deliberate about it and formulate it to think I'm saving myself from something, to be suffering the exact same effects of the things I'm doing I don't even think I'm doing. And that's really the primary essence of what we're talking about, is beginning to see that this thing we call the subconscious is not sub at all. It's being expressed in all of the defective things we think we're out of control of, that we think are random issues in nature that are happening to us. But it's actually giving us evidence. The effects are, we can't see our thoughts, but we can see the effects of them. And if the effects are conflicted, the thoughts are conflicted. And if they're conflicted, they're arguing over themselves. And there isn't even a self in there to argue over other than thoughts thinking of themselves. And to start to see that is to start to relieve us of the obligation of making believe I need to perfect myself in the thinking I'm doing about the thinking itself, because there is no self in there, exactly as Arliss put it. There is no self. There's just
I was proud of myself to actually hear what he said and kind of take it in. I'm still thinking about it 4 days later, rather than just saying, oh, he doesn't know, but to actually give him some credibility.
Well, and to think of yourself as proud over that, think of that. Rather than just reckoning with something that actually frees you a little bit.
Yeah, I don't do that. I have to either be proud or hurt. One of the two.
Right. Well, but Anthony, that's historic in my experience too, because I have a tendency toward arrogance, like nobody I've ever met for the most part, especially because it's so close to me that it seems magnified. But the idea of taking, the idea of ego or self-consciousness being undue regard for appearance means that we're really, really worried about the appearance we're promoting because we really, really know it isn't real. We know it's an appearance. We know it's a projection. We know we're promoting it. And we're hoping other people's thinking aligns with it and they buy the line, the story that we're promoting.
And I guess that's why I had a hard time, because I think of myself as this great decision maker, right? And he goes, you have a hard time making decisions. And then you're impulsive.
Let me blow the lid off of that a little bit, Anthony. You make decisions all the time. You're afraid of admitting the decisions you make that are wrong. Because to be wrong in your thinking is to constantly think you need to promote an image that's right. So we mutter and think way too long about things rather than just go try them out. Remember the guy Bo who came and talked about struggling with his wife? He was always trying to do the right thing. And I said, what she hates about you is you're always trying to do the right thing and you're seldom right. So I said, just do the wrong thing for a while. And he came back 2 weeks later and said, married 20 years. She never respected me more. It's saying the wrong things. Just let it out. Like I say to Katie, I have a thought. It has to do with you, and I'm going to tell you what it is, but it's a thought I'm having. It's not about you. I'm just connecting you to it. So I'm going to tell you what it is. And when I started that some time back, a few days later, she said, I'm having a thought, and it has to do with you. I said, tell me what that thought is. We'd start laughing at how seriously those things can be taken when, in fact, if they're simply thoughts, it's actually an indication I'm thinking about her. And she kind of liked that. She said, I don't particularly like what you're thinking, but the fact you're thinking about me tells me that there's more going on in there than I often think is going on, because I'm thinking you're not thinking about me at all. When in fact, she's right, because I'm thinking about my thinking. I'm just including her in that illusion, that narrative. But yet it makes the whole process so much easier because we laugh a lot more about the sort of disconnect than we used to. She used to feel I was attacking her when I would tell her these things. And I said, look, if I can't be honest about the stupidity and idiocy that I create in my own thinking, I'm going to live with it as though it shouldn't happen. It's going to have effects on me. They're going to be very, very demeaning. It's not going to help. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to get honest. It doesn't mean I'm right. I don't have to be. Honesty isn't about being right. It's about being honest about what I'm thinking. And if what I'm thinking is wrong, the honesty is expressing the wrong. It takes the punch out of it. It takes the fight out of it. It takes the resistance out of it. It takes the persistence out of it, which is exactly what addiction relies on. The maintenance of the defense, the fight, is continuing to maintain the addiction that I have nothing to do with it, and as a result can do nothing about it. And all of a sudden I say, oh, I can do plenty about it. I can mention it. Pretty simple. And the effects are we laugh a lot more. So if we're taking seriously something that's a joke, you can see the conflict in that. If you start admitting the joke, it becomes funny for everybody. And Milton Dicus, that wrote the book Lighten the Fuck Up, that was his whole premise. Don't take yourself so seriously. I would say you don't even have a self to be serious about. It's your thinking you're taking so seriously as to imagine it's who you are. And if you're continually repeating that mantra in your head, you're going to think there's something else to find somewhere else, because you're not going to want to admit what you're doing where you are.
Yeah, that's real helpful.
To insanity, it's insane to admit you're insane, for the simple reason that insanity is never maintained unless it's thought of as sanity. It's exactly why these demonic characters go about doing what they're doing and think they're Stalin killing 20 million of his own people because they didn't think like he did. That isn't sanity. That's narcissism. It's extreme self-will run riot. What's self-will? Choosing myself over and over again is what I think, and trying to define myself so clearly and then demand everyone else think like I do. Nobody's ever going to think like I do. Everybody gets to think the way they do, but we can all think of the exact same thing in an essence and think about it in different ways and be fascinated rather than feeling threatened or defensive about what people are thinking when we start seeing, wow, these are all just poetic expressions of different viewpoints that are talking about the absolute same thing that binds us all, and not binds us in any kind of way that actually holds us hostage, but in every way that frees us from any hostage taken, and realizing that there's no ransom, there's no martyrdom in it, there's no sacrifice in it. It's actually the surrender of winning everything. It's profound rather than feeling lost. Profound is forefinding. If we already have it and admit it, it's a big difference than thinking we need to get it and can't find it. God is not on a milk carton in Idaho somewhere, hoping to be found. It's our thinking that's lost that gives us the impression that God needs to be found. Again, that giant leap to simply try to excuse, and we do it pretty well collectively as a species. So it's really not what I'm doing alone, it's what we're all doing together that we're witnessing in terms of the effects we're seeing in the interaction with the world that we're in. It's everybody, it's not somebody, it's not some body, it's all of our bodies collectively creating whatever we're doing. And so if we think of everyone and think in absolute terms, it immediately includes everyone, because the absolute can't have exceptions to it. The infinite can't have exceptions if it's infinite. If it has any exceptions, it's not infinite, and there it is. We would be happy being limited and being depressed and anxious. It would be normal because it would be the only thing we could do. There wouldn't be choice about it at all, and we just think this is our lot in life, period. Wouldn't even occur to us. The fact that we struggle tells us that we know better. We know there's something else, and we're simply not expressing it. And where it is where we are. And what it is everything that we are in total, not me, not just you, all of us, everywhere, all the time, everything too, by the way. Even these things we call inanimate objects are based on this same thing called life. And they do not argue with themselves or anything else. They interact seamlessly, and we interreact harmfully. So it's choice. If it weren't a choice, we could do nothing about it. We wouldn't be talking about it or thinking. Jana, good to see your name and lights. Ty, Gabe.
Today's my birthday. What a great birthday present to share with you guys. My
Happy birthday, Anthony.
belly button birthday.
How old are you?
45.
For
For our listeners.
You knew exactly the unanswerable question there.
I know, right? You
You're
didn't even
the only male that I know that hides his age. So it just has me imagine you're 15 years older than you probably are.
I think he's 61. If it was 60, it would be the big 60.
I think he's 87.
Whoa, whoa.
Because if I have to imagine, if he's afraid to mention his age, I have to imagine something that would be worth admitting.
I feel 25.
I used to know it. I'm 65, so I know he's just a few years younger than me.
59.
Do you know how long I've known you, Anthony? 2007.
Wow.
Actually, it was 5. It was when I moved in that house. My divorce was 7, so 2005. So almost 20 years.
I'm grateful I met you, Jana. You're awesome.
Have I benefited you?
Definitely. You can pull sheet. You're good at pulling covers.
Well, then I'm going to have her come more often when you're here. Appreciate y'all. Anthony, it's a birth date, not quite a birthday, unless you're growing up in some way. And I would say we are every day, even when we're not admitting it.
Yeah.
And that those little sparks of growth, of undoing the things we think are imperative to redo, is the beginning of letting go and seeing there's nothing to hang on to, and really coming to terms with it. It's just a thought, thinking about a thought. That's all
And that's the scary part where we talk about it gets scary, right? At some point you realize everything was for nothing, a magic trick for nobody.
Well, you will witness the fear you've been building in your body when you face those things, which can feel like you're getting worse, but to begin to feel things that are happening is actually getting better at feeling. And they will dissolve and dissipate. They don't come back unless you repeat it and recreate them.
You'll start to feel better.
Well, you'll get better at feeling.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Feeling
You'll
better
feel
is
better.
actually getting better at feeling. If you're getting better at feeling, you're feeling what's worse is worse, and that can feel worse. But to begin to feel worse and let it be worse is not to fight it and perpetuate it and magnify it. It's to allow it to begin to dissolve, because it isn't anything other than a thought thinking about a thought that is no more than an illusion, thinking
Yeah.
about it as being real. So
And I did have a cold for the last 4 days, and I'm finally at the end of it. But boy, that really changes your beliefs and makes everything seem much more in perspective.
Okay.
The little things didn't seem to bug me quite as much.
Things aren't baffling you as much as they normally would.
You mean
Yeah, not when you have a cold. I could let things slide. I didn't have to fix everything.
they're not baffling. They're not baffling you as much as we are. Anthony, you're a good sport, and
Thank you.
you have come a long way from the first time we met. And my sense is that this historic culture that we've created around this, that seems so preposterous to imagine a solution could be so simple and so immediate and so readily available, takes a minute to sort of breathe in and let out, because walking out of this time we spend together is going into a world that very largely promotes those lies and those things. And it's easy to fall into that rut. But it's also easier to correct something based on reality, because you have reality in your favor, than think you're going to overcome it by overcoming something that isn't real by thinking someday you'll make it real. It's very simple. This is what health is about. It's what healing is about. It's what forgiveness is about. It's about letting things be as they are rather than as we think they are. And then we can think about them all we want. You'll say, okay, well, that's what I'm thinking about them. That's not what they are. Whatever they are, they are. And whatever they are is going to be beyond my thoughts, because I don't need to define them to allow them to be as they are. So I stop in that constant chronic engagement of trying to figure it all out. Like Arliss was saying, the definition of all those words is impossible to ever get right. But it's possible to use the words to point at something, if we all know it, as a reminder that we all share something in common, because the presence of that awareness is always present. And if our awareness begins to take apart some of the things we constantly think we're doing and are, and start to allow that, it becomes very quickly apparent, and you'll start realizing you've always known it. It's not something new. It's new. It's new now, but it's not new in the sense that it wasn't there when in that past that we construct in our.
Or what if I give my neighbor more credit than I'm dissing him off, saying that maybe that is my problem. Maybe he's right. I can't make decisions, and that's why I get this mental obsession, because I can't make a decision, and I keep going over it in my head and replaying it and analyzing. Where if I just admit.
Why don't you let what he's done be your experience and notice how much it's stimulated you to look at what you're doing in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, and be thankful to him for offering you that opportunity.
Yeah, that's the way I looked at it.
Debate. You're now debating whether he's right or wrong, because you're wondering whether you're right or wrong over the debate of what he's doing. You see how it just sort of spreads like a contagion?
Well, I'm saying, what if I give him more credit than I'm giving him, and saying that's my problem? That
I heard you.
He was on the button. He was right on the button, Anthony. The second you said it, I thought that guy's a crazy genius.
Yeah.
The fact is, if he's giving you anything to contemplate beyond the bounds of what you thought was going on, he's offering you a gift. And you, I will suggest, manifested that gift, because if you are so hell-bent on denying things, you are creating and manifesting effects to give you some perspective on looking back at what's going on, so that you can take a second. This perspective, dimensional space we're in, is beautifully like mirrors. They're great images of us. They give us a sense of how we look. But
what's funny too is, while we were on this meeting, he was texting me, and I said I was on a Zoom call, but he's at the nursery. He was nice enough he's going to grab me a tangerine tree. So he's sending me pictures, and I couldn't make a decision on which one.
Tell him you might want a lemon tree, and you cut it.
Yeah, it didn't have enough fruit on it. So I said, no, I want one that has fruit on it. And he's like, this one's fine. Trust it.
I think what I'm hearing you say, Anthony, is he doesn't need to be right or wrong. He's giving you an observation. If his observation is valuable, you're starting to see the potential of your experience to offer you insight. It's a curriculum. It's like we're in constant school.
Yeah.
Why-
And I was so wrong. I was thinking, what are you talking about? That's what I do is make decisions, but I'm thinking maybe
Yeah.
he's right. Maybe that's my problem. I
My
can't
sense,
make-
though, is you're not afraid to make decisions. You're afraid to make the wrong decisions.
Yeah.
Stay in a quandary until you think it's right, and then you make it and realize it wasn't anything.
Yeah, and that's perfectionism. I always had a hard time starting by report because I wanted to do it right. It had to be the right city. You had to pick a city to do your report on. And I was like, fuck, I picked the wrong city. I should have picked that other city. I still remember from 40 years ago, I picked Texas. And I'm like, what am I going to do in Texas? I
So-
should have picked it.
What's perfect is things as they are, because there isn't anything else like them, and there's no comparison to them. So there is no
Or
imperfection.
they don't have to be perfect. They just have to
Hang on,
be. I don't have to judge it again.
Anthony,
It doesn't have to be perfect.
Anthony, slow down. If things are as they are, they're perfect.
Well,
Anthony, an argument. I'm not trying to figure out how I can convince you of something. I want you to sit with this.
yeah, that's true. We talked about this earlier.
Let things-
I was on that side of the fence before. Now I've come back over.
Well, at least you see. But if something is allowed to be as it is, it already is. There's no argument in that. Nature isn't arguing over itself because it's doing what it does based on how it's designed. What it's
So
doing.
that's perfect.
It isn't arguing, right? It's not arguing. Arguing comes, or imperfection comes from comparison, and thinking as a result something else. This is exactly what addiction starts in.
And this is my problem. Everything always has to be perfect. I can't live with it unless it's perfect.
What if everything's already perfect?
That's where I'm at. This is great. Then I don't have anything to deal with. I don't have to try to make it perfect.
Let me give you a homework.
Yeah.
Start to fight for all the imperfection that you see this week, and see how
Yeah.
that last
Great it is.
say.
And let me give that example. Like the things that are really valuable are the ones that aren't perfect. The cracked, the one vase that has these certain
Again,
cracks in it.
you're fighting for the idea of imperfection being real, when in fact it's just a comparison that you're claiming is real that's imperfect.
Okay.
It's the thought you're doing that's imperfect. And it isn't imperfect. It's because you think it has to become perfect, because you're not having the thought you're having the one you think you should be having. And so it never is the one you have, because it's not ever going to live up to the idea that it's going to satisfy you in all respects, when in fact the fulfillment of it is simply having it and saying, oh.
And there's a little bit of stress because I want my birthday to be perfect. It's got to be the best. It's like it's stressful. Yeah.
Of
Like
course
instead
it's
of
stress,
being
'cause
your
you're
birthday, it's
asking-
got to be the best one, better than anybody's.
You must be thinking of it as imperfect to think you need to perfect it.
Yes, exactly. That's true.
Things are what they are as they are. If you begin to notice that and admit that, you already notice it, you already know it. Admitting it to thinking, when thinking is obsessed, constantly looking for some way to divide and conquer that never conquers and always divides, it's not going to work. Now, the contemplative aspect of this, Anthony, is just to let the thought sit with it for a week. And my sense is, like with Bo, when I said, be wrong, start being wrong, say the wrong thing, open up a little bit. He freed himself. All of a sudden, it made no sense to him to be wrong, and he started doing things that were right. That's very valuable. He wasn't trying to fight being wrong, so he didn't continue to repeat being wrong.
Yeah.
He began to admit the wrong he was doing and saw it as wrong, and there's no conflict in that, so it dissipates, and the rightness of our being nature and our knowing nature, our intuitive nature, starts to express itself before you can even think about it, because the thinking's busy expressing it. It isn't busy wondering about it, isn't busy doubting it, it isn't busy trying to perfect it. It's busy expressing it because there is nothing else for it to do. That's its design. That's what thinking's designed to do. And ultimately, that's what love is. It's this pure expression of support and giving, the same givingness that this absolute nature gives us individually and collectively is exactly what that will is that we're asked to give, which is why serving others, helping others, is so critical in sobriety, and so much reinforces the purposefulness and the usefulness of our existence.
Yeah.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Happy birthday, Anthony.
Yeah, bye guys.
See you around campus as we
Bye,
learn
Gabe.
from the curriculum that's created in our circumstances.
Yeah. Hey, Lindsay's not been showing up anymore, I guess, huh?